Hi everyone, and welcome to our webcast on design for future innovation. In this webcast, we're going to talk through some of the different aspects of an approach to exactly that, to designing for future innovation. To introduce myself first, I'm Andrew Kennedy. I'm a data and analytics consultant for Thorogood. Contact details on the screen. And I'm going to talk through, like I say, a set of principles that help you design for future innovation. So the first thing we're going to get to, we're going to talk a little bit about the challenge, how you recognize the challenge and where it comes from. And then from there, I'll look through a list of different pointers in how you set out that design in a way that allows you to deliver now and design for the future at the same time. This is something that I've put together with a couple of my colleagues, working based on the conversations that we've had at customers doing exactly this and working with them on their platform. So I think it's going to help to give a little bit of context about what we do as a company in setting out, where some of this thinking has come from. Thorogood is a data and analytics consultancy. So we look at analytics, we look at the technology that supports analytics, and we do all of that with a business focus. So we work with our clients, who are typically large global organizations, looking across data engineering, data science, and data visualization applications. And throughout that, we're doing design of the platform, design of the solutions, and then kind of building out strategies and roadmaps, as well as building the actual applications themselves and supporting the adoption of those by the organization. We work typically in four key verticals. So the examples that I'll give today probably come from some of these. So that's consumer goods and manufacturing, pharmaceutical and life sciences, retail banking and capital markets, and insurance. So we work across those. We also work with organizations that don't fall neatly into one of those categories, where there are applications that overlap with them. But typically, these are the types of organizations we work with. They're large, they're global, and they're data rich. And really, that's the key thing. They've got large volumes of data that they need to use to understand their business better. And so we'll talk about the challenges that there is in doing that, and some of the ways to approach it to design the best platform that allows future innovation. So first off, let's talk a little bit about where that challenge comes in. And I'll take one of our segments in particular, talk through that a little bit more. So we're taking the example of a consumer goods company, and on the screen I've put some of the different areas that a consumer goods company will build applications. So these are all different areas that we've worked in with some of our clients. And each of these departments, each of the use cases that there is, will have different requirements. They'll have different requirements from data, and that will lead to different requirements from technology. Also, for each of these business areas, there'll be different solution areas involved, whether that's in data acquisition, structured reporting, through to then things like process automation and more advanced techniques like machine learning and AI, alerting based on that. So all of those different solution areas and all of those different use case areas, and at any point in the business, there'll be changing priorities among those things. So that's one of the places that we need to have a level of flexibility, is to respond as the priorities change in the different areas of the business and the different solution areas within each of those that we're trying to address. The second place that a level of complexity comes in is from some of the technologies that are available. There are obviously a number of different cloud vendors. At Thorogood, we work with Azure, AWS, GCP as the three major cloud vendors. And the example I have on the screen is from Azure, but the same is true from some of the others there. So we have a set of different tools within that platform, and each of those tools has continuous improvements and updates. This is a screenshot taken from the Azure Updates information tool, and the highlighted boxes are ones that have had a lot of updates more recently. So depending on the tool, some of them have more updates, some of them have fewer, but the update cycle on a lot of these can be updates every month, if not slightly more frequently than that in some cases. So whatever it is we're thinking about in our platforms, like I said, we've got changing priorities within the business and the use cases and the solutions that we want to build. We've also got changes in the technologies that we're using to build those. So with those different aspects, there are things to think about. And when it comes to the technologies, we would have an option of just saying, well, let's use the technologies that are available now and ignore the updates. But that set of updates is representing a constantly improving capability of the platforms that are available, and the new and updated capabilities within that platform is something that we want to make use of. And that's why we want to replan to optimize every so often, so that we bring in the new capabilities within the tools, make use of those, and make sure that we're developing the best solutions that we can based on the technology that's available. So Now that we've recognized the challenge, we get into the kind of 4 practical steps as to how to approach the challenge. And the first thing I want to talk about in there, second on our list of 5, I guess, is to create a prioritized roadmap of the different areas that we want to look at, and talk a little bit about what I mean by prioritized and how we prioritize the different solutions that we want to build. So there are different places that the value can come from in the changes that we're making in our technical solutions. So the first set, we can build new solutions to improve business processes. And when we improve the business processes, we expect that to either increase sales, optimize costs, or reduce risk. And typically, most of the applications that we build fall into at least one of those 3 categories. On top of bringing improvements for the business, there's the opportunity to optimize the platform as well. And that can happen through increasing innovation. So we more quickly build the solutions for those business processes and deliver more value faster. We can optimize overheads by reducing our technical costs, or we can reduce risk by designing a platform that's more robust. So there are various different aspects that we need to think about in our platform, both to deliver new value for the business and also to optimize the platform as we're designing it. So understanding those goals will help us to prioritize. On top of that, then, when we're thinking about the business use cases and the solutions that we build for those business use cases, there are a couple of different things that you want to think about in prioritizing those. In particular, think about a mixture of the impact, complexity. And impact can mean a number of different things depending on what you're looking at. So the strategic impact. So what are the organization's key goals? How well does that potential solution align to those organizational goals? It can be the overall business impact. So there'll be a return on investment or an ROI associated to each project, and a sense of, how much does it impact the organization from that perspective. And then alongside that, the complexity, how much effort is it going to take to implement? How much is it going to take for the business users to adopt that within their process? So these different aspects need to be thought about. And by putting each of the projects against these different axes, this is one way that we've helped clients in the past to prioritize the different initiatives that they're considering. And once you've got that, once you've done that analysis, that then helps to lay out what is the roadmap. And working across the organization, you can come up with an aligned roadmap that covers the different business units, the different technical teams, and put that all together into a pattern of what is it that we want to deliver as part of the next 1 to 3 months. The time zones are obviously different by client as well, but typically there's a very short term, slightly more medium term, long term, but still in view, and then a future vision that these are things that we want to do at some point. We want to think about them, we want to plan for them, but they're longer term. These are just example projects. The reality, these lists tend to be a lot longer. Your future vision will not just have 3 initiatives in there. You potentially got 30, 40, 50, depending on how much detail you want to go into, how many business units are represented in this. But for the 1 to 3, the key thing really in this is the short term, you will have a few known next steps. So a shorter list of known projects, probably with identified owners. These are the things that we're going to do in the more immediate term. The 4 to 12 month stage, we could be starting to think about our goals, think about the metrics that we want to use to track success, and start to plan those out. 13 to 36 months is starting to get longer term vision. Maybe we're thinking about who owners are for those and who needs to be involved in those discussions, but they're slightly longer horizon. And then future vision are things that we know we want to do, but we're not even really in the planning stages for those yet. And so when you've got that idea of what are the solutions, what are the initiatives that we want to drive, and in what timeframes, we know that there's no next steps, the ones that are going to happen. The further out ones actually are priorities. Our priorities are likely to adjust over a period of time. So we can assume that there's going to be some change in that, but having a vision of what might happen and where we want to put our effort is going to allow us to take some of the other steps that we have in designing this platform. So that brings us into number 3, designing a flexible platform blueprint. So we're going to use that roadmap that we had, and on top of that, map some of the technologies that are involved. So I've kind of done a summary version of that here, and at a very high level marked in some of the newer technologies that we might want to use, some of the use cases that we have. So for example, in our 1 to 3 month horizon, we're forecasting e-commerce sales for a single market, Singapore. So we know we need some form of machine learning tool for that. If we're doing a forecast, it could just be a time series forecast. We can use a fairly simple machine learning tool. So just as long as it handles machine learning, then we're okay. Similarly, the 4 to 12 months, we've got a pilot chatbot that supports some level of interactions and probably is handling the simplest support interactions to just take the the highest levels of pressure off those support teams. So that we're looking at a simple chatbot tool. We want to prove out the case, prove that we can do something there. But then noting that if we go further along the list into the future vision, our support team has suggested that they want to automate support using a chatbot to cover 80% of the queries that come to them. That's going to get into more complex queries and probably will need a more complex chatbot tool. And so that's one example of where having this kind of future vision allows us to think about, do we want to start building towards that more complex chatbot tool at this stage, and how do we choose a tool that's going to support what we want to do in future as well as what we want to do now? And it doesn't force us to choose the more complex tool. We could still decide it makes sense, knowing that we can get away with a simple tool at this point and then adopt a more complex tool later on. We still have that option. We can make that decision based on a better vision, though, of where we want to go with it, what's going to be useful later on, and what we can adapt. So it's about understanding the landscape, being able to make decisions with a more holistic view of what the roadmap is. And this will help to highlight where the important aspects are for which of the technologies are going to be used across a whole load of different use cases, that it's worth us spending more time getting the right decision on that versus which of the tools that are going to support a single use case or one or two use cases, where we can actually align that technology specifically to the use case and make a more bespoke decision in that case. And also it tells us which technologies do we need to make the decision on now based on what's available at this point versus which are we trying to keep flexibility for in the future, but we don't necessarily need to make the detailed decisions quite yet. So for example, in this diagram, the future vision, we need IoT and we need to be able to track things from IoT devices. But we've decided for whatever reason in this organization, that's not something we're doing in the short term. So we can probably leave those decisions for later on. So long as we're able to see that, do the analysis and check, will that fit into our platform later on? And we can leave space for it, but we don't necessarily need to make the decisions about which tools and technology is going to be exactly at this stage. So just to kind of recap on that and put a little bit more of it down in words, we're looking to design to progress the current priorities. So we want a pattern that allows us to fix on the essentials, things like security, monitoring, and governance, and then use blueprints to set out the approach. So knowing which tools and technologies we're using as our go-to tools and technologies, but acknowledging within that there are going to be some level of special cases. At the same time, we're trying to keep flexibility for the future vision. And that means planning that we're going to reuse the data where possible. We're going to reuse the applications where possible, designing with that in mind. And so keeping our options open. So when it comes to designing data formats, the platforms that we're going to use, designing those in a way that we're going to be able to reuse the data. And when it comes to designing data models, we want to keep those reusable. And for example, that might mean more closely linking the data models to the organizational structure and the organizational uses of the data, rather than building data models that cater to a specific set of reports that we're building this week. So keeping the balance of those two things always, and that really is one of the key things in this, is designing to progress the current priorities, fixing the things we need to fix on, and giving guidance where we can, while keeping a level of flexibility that is open for what we want to do in the future. To put a little bit more meat on that, let me give an example of an Azure architecture. And this is based on something we did with one client around machine learning use cases. So we worked with them to put in place the core architecture design. So this represents their kind of architecture blueprint, I'll call it. And when I say blueprint, I mean that as an architecture design that we use as the standard starting point that we can then build on top of. So here we have a data lake within Azure. So that's the core block in the middle. We have some kind of reporting friendly tool on the right hand side. So you can see we've got various different front end tools. I'm trying to remember what the logos are: Tableau, Power BI, Click, and Excel in this case, but that could be different per organization. And then in between, some processing layer if needed. That might be something like SQL database or Azure Synapse. Those are both used by this customer. And using Azure Data Factory to control all of that, pulling from various different sources and pushing that through into the reporting layer through those different stages. But on top of that, then, in some of the different scenarios, in fact, I would almost say in most of the scenarios that we were involved in, there was some level of customization needed to that. So maybe your standard cases, the easy cases that you can just get on and do, Blueprint may cover all of it. But when you get into more bespoke solutions that are more tailored to a specific use case, there's likely to be something that needs to be done on top of that. So we worked with them to put in place their machine learning blueprint that covers probably 80% of the machine learning use cases. And that puts in place Azure Machine Learning as a single tool, reading from the data lake, doing the machine learning processing and pushing back into the data lake the results, pushed back into the data lake so that those can be then surfaced for reporting. Second case, real-time interaction. So there were a couple of applications that wanted real-time interaction, and we decided to do that using the web app in some cases, and that meant building in Azure web apps. So our standard blueprint doesn't have the web app in there, but we're able to put that in this case because it's justified by the specific use case, building in Azure App Service as the neat and integrated tool for that. Then in other cases, we built in some, we had a case that we were using legacy technology from before we'd made the decision to go with Azure Machine Learning. There were some applications that were using Azure Machine Learning. There were others that were using tools like Databricks. And so those cases, rather than rebuild the whole application again in a very similar technology, we actually brought Databricks into the platform in some of those cases, depending on how easy it was to move across. And so again, by taking that core blueprint and saying, how can we do something that's close to that allows us the benefit of doing something, in an organized and standardized fashion, but without committing to rebuilding everything if there are places that we can make use of existing solutions and existing technology. And so we were able to work with Databricks, but also work with options that aligned the monitoring and logging and so on, so that we overcame some of the challenges in running multiple architecture options, but recognizing that replatforming all of the data science solutions was actually going to be a blocker in that case to delivering a higher level of business value. And then that blueprint is something that you can think of as expanding into future use cases. So we mentioned in this example, the example roadmap that we had, the future vision had IoT. So to give an example of what that might look like, we could take that and play that into our standard blueprint by adding some of the IoT tools at the bottom of it. And here we've got some of the Azure standard tools. So IoT Hub is the input source, using Event Hub for real-time analytics and Logic apps to either automate some of the actions or provide alerts. And then also IoT Hub will feed into the data lake. And in this case, because that's a future thing, it may be enough for us just to say, actually, we know this would work. We don't necessarily need to get into the detail of standing up all of these resources, provisioning them and making sure they're all connected. It might be enough for us just to say, okay, in theory, there's an option that we can use in a couple of years. So when it comes to that point, we'll build these tools in. And if the tools then have changed, or if there are better tools that come along in the meantime, we've still got the flexibility to do that. But we know at least that we've got one option that will work for us to deliver value through that use case. So again, kind of recapping on that, the blueprint allows us to have a standardized set of tools that we use. It gives a standardization in the organization as to things like monitoring, logging, security, governance, those aspects that need to be standardized. But it still gives us the wiggle room and the freedom to add in the odd extra tool as it's justified by each of the use cases. And that kind of plays into the fourth idea that we have here, creating space for experimentation. And perhaps this even goes a level beyond just saying there's flexibility in it, to actually saying we need to be willing to go outside of not just the technical choices, but also the use case choices that we have. And so when it comes to experimentation, and there are various different types of experiment, in Agile you have a spike, which is a very small experiment just to test one aspect of the technology. Then you've got proof of concepts, which test kind of a use case, pilots and proof of value, which allow you to kind of pick up a smaller aspect of what would be delivered by a project. And so depending on how new and novel the type of solution is that you're building, versus whether the question has been answered before and you know it's going to work because you've done this, or you've done something very similar. Depending on where you are in that spectrum, changes the level of experimentation that's needed to know what the value is that's going to come from the solution, to know how you need to approach it as well. And so to take a few of the different ways that it can change in terms of the experimentation that's needed, sometimes that's experimenting to find what data works for the solution that you're looking at. So just to kind of give a couple of different ideas on the spectrum here, if you're using a finance data set to report on sales, that's something that a lot of organizations are already doing. You may well already be doing that in your organization. And so that's something that basically you just need to build out the reports. And yes, the report build is going to be iterative and probably has a level of trying things to see what gives the best representation of the finance data set. But realistically, most of the data can be loaded into the platform. You know the data sets that you're using, there's not much experimentation that's needed there. In a completely different scenario, if you're using demographic markers to predict which products are going to sell well in a particular store, there are all sorts of different patterns that go on there. And so even though a number of organizations use that kind of approach to try and improve cross-selling activity, different organizations will need different types of demographic markers and different types of activity brought from different parts of the organization to understand which products are going to sell well in which stores. And so there's a level of experimentation that's needed, taking some of the different data sources that we have available, whether it's internal or public, trying those out and seeing which data sources give us the best information on that use case. Then we have experimentation on use cases themselves. So a really common example of that would be reporting claims value across insurance policyholders. So on use cases, for example, taking a different segment, a different sector, reporting claims value across insurance policyholders is something that's really commonly done. Again, we've probably done that in our organization before, so we know exactly how that works. And that use case doesn't need any experimentation because we know already what we're going to do. It's going to deliver value because it's already done that. Another use case, though, if we're trying to predict product sales levels for different levels of lockdown, something that has been in a couple of customers thinking over the last couple of years. How do new and novel things that are happening outside the organization affect what's happening? That's something that we really don't know if we're going to be able to derive much business value from that in a time frame that allows us to actually use it to run the business and to make decisions. And so that's something that we might want to do in a more experimental fashion. If nothing else, to quickly prove the value of it and do a kind of pilot on that. And so, as an example of a use case that is more novel and unique, something that you haven't tried before, it's something you'd want to run some sort of experiment on. And then the third axis that I'll call out, the final one, is technology and tools. And so here we've got a couple of examples. If you're using a chatbot to handle support queries in multiple languages, that's one that a client came to us with, and it was one where we were using sets of tools and technologies that they hadn't used before. And even that probably in that combination, it's a more bespoke combination of tools and technologies to deliver that. By contrast, then, forecasting sales volume based on past orders, that might be something that's entirely new to our organization, but from a technology perspective, there are tools that are designed exactly for that. And we know that question has been answered before. How do we forecast sales volume? We know which tools we use for that, at least, even if there's experimentation that's needed on the data sets that drive it. So a few different examples of how you can think about things as being either completely novel and unique to something that's been answered before, and realistically, everything is going to sit somewhere in the middle of that spectrum rather than at one end or the other. Some of the questions that help drive that, questions like how new is it to us as an organization? Is this the first time we've done it? Even if it's something that's new to us, is it something that we can learn from someone else who's done it? And a quick plug there for Thorogood services. Quite often we'll have experience in something, even if it's in a different industry, we can pull some of that thinking across and kind of cross-pollinate ideas from that perspective. There may be times that you can buy something in, either as a pre-packaged solution or an accelerator based on existing work, and you might be able to buy in knowledge from outside. Sometimes the requirements are really well known, sometimes they aren't. So how well those requirements are known is something that will drive how experimental it is as well, because you can experiment to find out what the requirements are. Is it guaranteed to work first try? If you've done something so many times that you know it's going to work, that could be a really good reason to just go straight into the project phase of it. If it's not something that's guaranteed to work first try, and I'll give data science as an example where there are a lot of applications that do have to look at, is the data going to support the question at hand? How well is the data going to support the question at hand? And those things, again, that's something that drives a more experimental approach. And finally, can we quantify the value? So even if you've got something that's guaranteed to work first try, sometimes it's useful to experiment to see how much value it's going to drive, and therefore how high it is in your priority list, how fast you drive it, those kinds of questions. So using an experiment can help you to answer some of these questions at the bottom. Finally, number 5, improve direction regularly. So going back to that blueprint that we had, don't expect that blueprint to last forever. As we said at the start, the technologies change, the organizational priorities change, and the goals change for the platform even. So you need to revisit and realign your plans as the goals and technologies change. So depends on the organization. I know a number of clients will do this, but they'll do it at different frequencies. So, for example, you might want to take a high-level look at it every 3 months, but do the more detailed replanning once a year, where you kind of go back to first principles and look at all of the questions that we've had. Or you might want to do it more often than that, less often than that, depending on your organization and how much organizational change there is as well can drive it. So each time you do it, there are some things here on the screen to help you think about that replan and what you need to take into account. So I'll just go through these quickly. How do changes in the organization's priorities affect the goals of the platform? So again, we know that the priorities of the organization were a really big driver of how we designed it in the first instance. So if those change, that's something that means that we need to do some level of reevaluation to bring things back in line. Are we delivering effectively on the current goals? We learn from experiments, but we also learn from what's happening on the platform in general and what's happening in production, what's being used by the business, and we can replan on that basis. Have we got the right balance of following the blueprints versus exceptions to the rule? The more exceptions we see, sometimes that signals that there's something in the blueprint that's missing, or sometimes we'll see a whole load of new applications come in trying to do something similar, and then we look at how do we support that kind of application as a standard approach within the blueprint. So seeing what's happening can help get you the right balance between things that are kind of nailed down and specified in the blueprint versus where you need to have a level of flexibility. What's changed in the technology and what do we know is going to change in the future? So as the technology changes, if you can keep on top of that, that helps to set where in the blueprint some of those technologies can move and shift. What else needs to be brought in? If there's a new capability coming in some technology that we think is going to make some of our use cases much easier to address, again, that might be something that we want to flag to the business teams that are responsible for that use case and see where we can kind of proactively drive some of those aspects. And then what challenges and opportunities can we foresee, whether it's coming from the technical, whether it's coming from the business side, what are all the things across the organization that we see as challenges and opportunities that are going to be looking to the data platform as part of the solution to those opportunities and challenges. So all of those things help you to revisit and realign your plans. So to recap all of that then, just in summary, the 5 points. First, recognize the challenge, and then from there, create a prioritized roadmap, lay out all the different use cases that you're looking at, what's short term, what's long term, what do we definitely want to do, what's a more aspirational goal within those use cases and solutions. From there, you can design a flexible platform blueprint that covers a lot of the cases and gives you the bedrock of what is in your data platform, but bearing in mind that you want to allow flexibility in that, to allow changes from that when there are use cases that need it, or point 4, to create space for experimentation and try out new technologies, try out new use cases, try out new data sets, whatever that looks like. And then 5th, finally, but definitely not the least in the list, improve direction regularly. So if we know that this blueprint is something that we're going to come back to and review again and again, we know that we can improve it later on. And that helps us have that flexibility as well, so that what we're doing now, we can do for now and deliver value quickly, but down the line, we're able to flexibly change and make sure that we continue to deliver value. Even if we haven't accounted for everything at this stage, we can take that into full account later on, just to adapt what we're doing appropriately. So I know that's been a quick look through principles for designing for future innovation, but hopefully it's been helpful to talk through that. What I'll touch on quickly now is how Thorogood can help you in that process. Like I say, this is something that we've seen a number of clients. So we've come up with different ways of talking through some of these different concepts, helping to design the platform, whether that's the first design right from scratch, or in some cases we'll come alongside a customer and help them look at specific aspects of that platform. So we have a set of workshops that we've drawn out, and then we'll tailor these to each individual customer that we work with. But we can use this as a starting point, so that we've got somewhere to have the conversations, and that helps us just to get started that little bit quicker. So we tend to start with an initiation workshop, where we work with the key stakeholders to agree high-level aims, talk through some of the different use cases, agree who the owners and stakeholders are for the rest of the process. And then from there, we start delivering things like a proof of value, so show what the platform can do, understand what some of the priorities in the organization are, how they align to the data platform. And from there, that lets us build out a wider strategy by bringing in the different stakeholders. And from there, then a phased delivery. So almost then that strategy workshop goes through the aspects that we've talked through in today's workshop. So there are a couple of steps we can do before that to kind of get things rolling, get the whole thing started off, and building up to that strategy workshop where we start to tie down those blueprints and the goals that help drive that. And touching back on the wider areas that Thorogood can help, we help our clients across a range of things. So obviously the strategies and roadmaps is really relevant to today's session, but also application design and development for individual solutions within that. There are customers that we work with on data and analytics services, and then also things like training and adoption for whether it's the tools or the solutions that we've implemented, and then ongoing maintenance and support. So there's a whole range of things we can help you with in this. And so if any of that is of interest, or you just want to figure out where in this we can get alongside and help, do get in touch. I'll put my contact details at the bottom of the screen. So please get in touch through email or LinkedIn are the two best ways to do it. Hopefully I'll look forward to hearing from you. Otherwise, we'll be in touch, and keep an eye on our website for more of these sessions. Thank you for attending.